Hello, everyone. I'm Robbie Swale, and this is the 12-Minute Method podcast. And in this podcast, I'm going to be investigating how we can beat procrastination, be more productive, and finally do those things we have been meaning to do. And in season one, what that means is I'm going to be reflecting on a number of things that I mostly first wrote about together in one place in the About the Author section of the 12-Minute Method books, in book one in particular. These are things that over my life I have procrastinated on, thought I might not get done, and then finally done in the end. And in each episode, I'll spend up to 12 minutes reflecting on one of those things and sharing those reflections with you, hoping to identify patterns, things that you can use, ways that you can finally do the things that you've been meaning to do. Hello, everybody. Robbie here again. But I have a confession to make. This is not the episode that I promised in the last couple of episodes of the show. Ever since December, I've had a little feeling in the back of my mind the whole time that I'm in breach of my integrity. I'm in breach of my word because I haven't created that podcast episode. So this is just a short episode from me talking a little bit about that, or what's been going on for me, and just to tighten that up. It's a cool idea that I learned from Rich Litvin, one of my coaches years ago, that when you feel like you have a breach of integrity, you can go and fix it. I've talked about this elsewhere. You know, that you can go back and pay back the people that every now and again you remember you never paid back. You can go back and apologize to the people that you really, every now and again, you feel guilt about. Anyway, this is a version of that. So essentially what happened was, for those who can't remember, if you're only just listening to this now, I said that there would be a last episode of season one of the podcast, which would be me listening back to all the episodes and pulling out the themes from that, because this podcast really has been an exercise in me learning. And there are a few reasons that hasn't happened. The first one is I didn't need to do it to meet my 100 podcast challenge. So if you haven't checked that out yet, check out the episode on the 100 podcast challenge. Essentially, partly the reason I was promising that, and partly the reason this whole podcast was created, was to help me meet that challenge. And I got there. I got to number 101 on the 20th of December, just as I was starting to get really ill. I was super ill over Christmas with a horrible virus. So I was in kind of rest mode, and therefore didn't either in that moment need to create it, or B, feel like creating it, because I felt really, really rough. So that was the first reason. That was the first thing that happened. And it's interesting, isn't it, to take away the creative tension of the challenge. And even with my promise, it wasn't enough without the deadline, like giving ourselves those deadlines and holding ourselves to it. Of course, it's also interesting to notice that, I was ill. And that can be another reason that we don't do the things we want to do. And then an interesting thing happened. So it was on my list of things to do in January, and I started working with my coach. At the moment, I'm being coached. Actually, right now, I've got kind of 2, maybe 3 coaches, depending on whether you class the third person as a coach. But one of them, Miles Downey, and I started doing work on what's the next phase of my career. You know, both the 100 podcast challenge and getting the 12-minute method books out. Those were huge projects. Those were huge things that took everything that I talked about across the episodes of this podcast so far, was called into action for me to get all the things I'd learned. I needed them all to get those projects over the line. And that was a huge amount of energy. And so one of the things that emerged as Miles and I started working on, well, what's next, is that it felt like I wasn't ready yet for another will-powered project. So there's a couple of distinctions. Miles really liked, I think the Italian's guy's name is Assagioli, and you'd have to look him up. I only really know about him from Miles's book, Enabling Genius is where I first read about it. He had a distinction between love and will. Love being the kind of more masculine energy dynamic, the forcing your way through things, the push energy. And will being the more feminine energy, not male and female, remember, masculine energy, feminine energy, the more feminine energy, creative, free, receiving energy. And a distinction that I'd never got before was this one between following importance and following interest. And as I'm playing with how do I have, in the next phase of my work, more ease, and just as much success. This distinction between importance and between importance and interest became really important. And so I started playing with, well, what if instead of following importance, which is the Warren Buffett story that in the James Clear blog, which I think I've mentioned before on the show, it's choosing 5 goals for the year. It's really putting everything into getting the books out or the podcast challenge. That's importance. And importance would have got this podcast episode made earlier. Interest, though, and importance is an act of will. Interest is an act of love. It's following curiosity. It's just allowing whatever is the right thing to do that day to be done. And although creating this podcast episode was on my importance list, and if I'd been doing it purely based on that, it would have got done, me practicing a different way of being means that it hasn't got done. And so there is not that episode yet. And I would have thought one day I'll want to make that. Like it's kind of on an article written on the back of it. It's like, it's there for me. There's like these ideas, and yet it's not the right time right now as I follow interest to do that. There hasn't been a day that's been clear enough or that I've woken up enough thinking, with this space that I have today, I want to listen back to those episodes. So I wouldn't be surprised if that happens sometime the rest of this year, sometime soon, and I'm sorry that it's not today. I'm really grateful in lots of ways that I've been following interest. The experiment has been sometimes really powerful, sometimes more difficult. It has had phases of effortlessness and ease, and phases where the lacking certain sprinkling of will or not using that muscle as much has made things harder for me. And so that's part of the experiment that I'm in at the moment. But I wanted to come back on and say that because I went for a walk with a new friend of mine, Susan, who hosts an amazing podcast called Life Beyond the Numbers. Check that out. We went for a beautiful walk in the Cotswolds in England, near about halfway between where we both live. And she mentioned she'd been listening to this show and that I hadn't recorded the last episode. I was just like, that is the confirmation signal that it is time. That I need to recommit to at least tying up that gap. And that's what this is. That's me tying up that gap. Do listen back to the old episodes for more inspiration. I'm still creating podcasts at thecoachesjourney.com. You can now sign up to receive the 12-minute blog direct to your inbox. You can do that on LinkedIn or at robbieswale.com. Click on the 12-minute blog page there and you can get that. So you can get that emailed to you every week. It's laughable. That's only just happened. 12-minute books are still available. And if there's anything I can do to support you to finally do the thing you want to do, of course, reach out. I'm still working with people one-on-ones. And I wonder if I've started having a little wondering if I have interest, or maybe we'll choose to focus in on creating a new group program in the autumn, which could be for people who find this work on finally doing the things that are calling them really valuable. So stay in touch. I'm sorry that episode isn't here today. I hope now you understand why. And wishing you a wonderful rest of your day. Okay, just a couple more things before you head out to whatever else you've got going on in the rest of your day. If you want to find out a bit more about me or sign up to my mailing list, you can do that at www.robbieswale.com. If you want to read the 12-Minute Method books, you can find out more about them on my website. You can find them on Amazon, and you can find them in lots of other bookshops and booksellers around the world. You might want to come and join the 12-Minute Method Facebook group. You can find that by searching for the 12-Minute Method on Facebook, or there's links on my website. And you can find some other people there who are interested in doing work that matters to them and finally doing the things that they want to do. You can find me on lots of social media platforms. I'm most active on LinkedIn, so you might want to find me there. And most of all, I'd love to hear from you, especially if something that I've made has inspired you to finally do something you've been meaning to do for a long time. Hearing those stories are some of the most meaningful things for me in my work. And so they help me keep going when I might want to give up. So I'd love to hear from you. But most of all, I'd love it if you did that thing that matters to you that you've been meaning to do.